So tonight we have an unbelievable episode. We got Eoghan O'Leary from the Tuition Centre, and he's going to help students become better at maths. One of the big issues for students, whether they're second, third year, fifth or sixth, also first, is they struggle with maths. So Eoghan is going to show you how to become better at maths, how to set the game up to win and to be more confident get into your mock exams, and whether you are thinking of dropping to ordinary maths or staying in higher, he's going to help you make that decision. So welcome everybody, very excited. We have an action-packed evening and we have Eoghan O'Leary in the house. Eoghan is if not the best, but certainly one of the best maths teachers in Ireland. Eoghan's from the Tuition Centre. I know Eoghan as well from Hamilton Academical down in Cork. And Eoghan is a brilliant teacher, great enthusiasm for maths, and has a brilliant way of explaining and communicating with young people. And the purpose of this evening, I know for a lot of students, is a lot of you struggle with maths. I see it in the feedback forms every week. And also for some of you, you are wondering whether to stay with higher, drop to ordinary. Some of you have dropped to ordinary. And I suppose the big thrust of this evening is to give you some tools and some strategies to help you become better at maths. And we're going to launch straight in with Eoghan. And Eoghan, I'm going to start off with the first question, which is, maths is a mindset, true or false?
Well, hello, Ray. Hello again, and glad to be back on here with you. And hopefully, you'll be down in Hamilton High School again someday. We've had a few brilliant sessions down there. So, maths is a mindset. Well, I can certainly say, after all this time, I would say maths is a language. So that's how I would kind of put it. That there's the subject matter that we all know from primary school into secondary school, and that changes a bit. It changes from arithmetic into algebra and then into things like calculus and statistics. But there's the language of maths and mathematics which kind of goes through it all. And if people are fluent with that language and have just I suppose a comfort level with it, they can get that confidence which is so important. And all of a sudden, some of the aspects that they thought might be difficult, suddenly aren't quite so hard.
And a lot of students would say, I'm no good at maths. I'm no good at maths. And they would say, well, what is that language? And how do I build that language? And how do I learn that language? Because we've got in the room here tonight, we've got third years, sixth years, we've got second and fifth years. So how, if a student is thinking, I'm just no good at maths, what do they need to do?
Well, I've seen that so often, and so many parents have said that to me as well over the years. I'm no good at maths. My parents were no good at maths, things like that. Well, the number one most important thing to improve at maths is practice. The more you practice, the better you will get, and that is just a certainty. We know it's true in different aspects of life, in sport, in playing music, in doing DIY, all these things. The more you practice, the better you get. And if you can spend that bit of extra time practicing, your confidence will improve. And as your confidence improves, so too can how much you enjoy going into class and how much you like the subject and so on. And maths can be amazingly kind of different from other subjects in the way how quickly your confidence can improve if you start getting the questions right. Because if you're inside in class, if I would personally say that I wasn't the best at English in the world, right? And it takes a long time to improve at English and to make your essays better. I would think myself personally, I was okay, but I didn't really have any flair for it. But with maths, if you go in and the teacher asks a question tomorrow, and if you put up your hand and get the answer right, all of a sudden the teacher's saying, great, well done. And very quickly your confidence can turn around if you go from a stage of getting the answers wrong to getting the answers right. And the best way for that to happen is practice.
And one of the big things that we help students build here is good study habits, routines. Everything we do here in Raise the Game is to help students study faster, quicker and better. Have you any recommendation for students on how and when to practice? Would you say daily, they should do 10 or 15 minutes of maths, and I'm talking here about a second right through to a sixth year. Any advice on how to practice and where to start? Because a lot of students say, I just don't know where to start.
Yeah, and I get that all the time, all the time. And I will say, there's one thing with maths that around this time of the year, sometimes students come to me for help in leaving cert or third year, and it can seem overwhelming because of the size of the course at that stage. But one thing all you guys here, second year, third year, fourth year, fifth year, sixth year, you all have in common is you all have a textbook. And I would say, apart from just a couple of geniuses that I've come across over time, every other person, including myself, and even Ray, I'd say, we all had to learn through practice. Now, how do you practice maths? The way you practice, the simplest way to practice, is cover the solutions to the worked examples in the textbook, try them yourself, and then look at the answer. The reason why that's successful is because the solution is there, worked out step by step. So if you have tried it and you've made an error at step 7 out of 8, you'd say, oh yeah, look, I nearly got it. It just made a little slip at the end. However, if you're just trying questions where you just go to the back of the book and see the final answer, all you know is if you got it right or wrong. So if you do that, say some of you guys now might have exams even this week. I know a lot of people would have done November assessments, but if you have an exam this week in even a topic like algebra, if you go through your textbook and do that for every worked example, I guarantee you're going to be better at that than you would be at the end. After that, I imagine most maths teachers will give you homework every night. So if you do that homework, and you do it to the best of your ability, you really actually do it, not copy down off the guy next year, the next day, or even quickly just rush through it yourself. If you really try it and really get stuck in, usually that is enough, plus your prep then for exams.
And is there a length of time that students should, practice or do maths? I always say to students, do some maths every single day. So if you were to give advice now, and some students who are leaving cert and junior certs, they're thinking, I'm so far back, how do I start? Or maybe they've failed their November assessment or got some, bad results, and up are coming the mocks, and they're getting a bit freaked out. Is there something they could do right now to get their confidence going?
Yeah, well, I would say, typically, am I saying it right? The Pomodoro method, is it? I think you.
Pomodoro technique, yeah.
Yeah, it's a Pomodoro technique. I tell you taught me that, but I think that's 25 minutes and then take your break for 5 minutes. And I think something like that is great for maths because it is hard to just go at it for a long, long period of time. And some students will say, where do I start with this? Particularly if you're leaving cert now and you're looking at all the topics in front of you. And the old thing, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Like that, just take one thing, just practice it. I always say with maths for leaving cert, make sure you practice your basics, because if you look at how it's marked, the basics are worth an awful lot of marks. But what I call the edge of the course isn't always worth that much. And I would say that 25 minutes a day, as you approach, obviously, your bigger exams, you got to up it. But if you're doing 25 minutes a day of maths, particularly if that's extra to your homework, you're in good shape.
And that's it. It's about creating that routine and that solid habit. And I'm always interested in when is the best time to do that. So, for example, should they do 2 hours at the weekend of maths, or should I, when I come home from school and my energy might be, I take a little break and say at 5 o'clock, I always say start with your best subject and then sandwich in. And I'm just looking at the poll here. We just did a poll. How many of you find maths your most challenging subject? 62%. So 2/3 nearly have said yes, they find it their most challenging subject. So any recommendation of, and I'm always curious, when would you build that in? Because a lot of students are busy and they're thinking 25 minutes, that sounds like a lot. Any advice on that?
Well, the number one I would say is maths is a subject that there is some research on this, that if you do it early in the day, it's generally going to work out better. Okay. So if you can get that time, particularly I'm going to say a Saturday morning, And then as you get closer to the exams, maybe a Sunday morning as well. That's a great time to do it. Of course, once you come home from school, it's not going to be the morning time. I only realized this in hindsight, but I had a great advantage when I was in school that I lived really, really close to it. And at the time, you're only a teenager, you don't really think about it. But I used to go home and I'd be at my study desk because we used to finish at 3:45. I used to be at this study desk. This was when I was in sixth year. I used to be there at 4 o'clock. And I used to try and do all my work then between 4 and 6, and I was done. And that was as the year went on, then I was obviously doing more revision. But for a lot of the year, that was it. I would say it's a difficulty for most students to leave maths until 9, 10 o'clock at night. I would advise against that typically, for the vast majority, try and get it done as early as possible.
And that's great advice. And what we talk about here is to break your evening into 2 hour blocks, 4 to 6, 6 to 8, 8 to 10. And if you're putting into that 4 to 6 block, that's a good sandwich of time to get into. And as you said, at the weekend, Saturday morning or Sunday morning, create a block of time for maths. Obviously, some students right now are trying to make a big decision. Should I stay with honours? Should I drop to ordinary? And I know some of you have already made that decision. Any advice around that right now? And I'm talking junior and leaving cert. And for second and fifth years, this is important for them to listen in on this.
Yeah, so a real tough call for a lot of students. Sometimes I would say, sometimes it's almost the first big adult decision you have to make in your life because, everything else is kind of charted out for you. And all of a sudden you're saying, well, am I going to take higher level maths or not? Because a lot of people are unsure on it. So what I would say is, if we break it down into the two groups, let me just take a drink of water here. I've children myself, and they're all under the weather, and I might just have a touch of it too. But if I'm a second year, third year student, okay, if you can hang in there at all at higher level maths, I would suggest you do. For some people, I've met plenty, they really do struggle with maths. And, if you are that student, that's absolutely fine. There's plenty of other avenues to go. But if you can hang in there, because nowadays you just have to get over 20% in junior cycle exam to get partially achieved. And partially achieved is a pass. So I would certainly suggest that for a lot of people, you're going to be able to get that. Okay, so that's number one. When you come to leaving cert, it's a real tricky one because there's this real difficulty in the Irish system, the Irish education system around maths, and it's that 50% of the marks are based on problem-solving questions. But you can only really do it, even as a teacher, I can only really teach it after I've taught loads of skills. But that doesn't really happen until maybe March, April in sixth year. So you go into your mock exams and you're underprepared because you can't be ready for that section of it. So it is a real difficulty in making that choice. I actually say to people, it kind of comes down to belief and a mindset that you said at the start, that as long as you believe that you're going to give it your best shot and you're willing to stick at it, I would stick at it. I wouldn't drop down under pressure from anybody else, right? However, if you really start to feel stressed or if you feel it's costing you in other subjects, that's a different matter. And then you look at it and say, okay, maybe this is for the best to go to ordinary. But feel free to come in with another question there, Ray, if you want me to kind of.
No, and for some students who have dropped to ordinary, but they still want to get a high grade in the ordinary, any advice for them?
Absolutely. And I will give you some definite number one advice is don't underestimate the ordinary level. It's a long course, right? And oftentimes students drop down. They think, oh, this is going to be fine. And then they realize, wow, there's a lot of material here. It is, of course, easier than the higher level. However, you have to revise. And what I would say to those students is to use your exam papers. Okay, use the textbook as well, same as I said before, but use your exam papers. And what you'll find is there are certain little topics, like say even percentages and things like that, error, percentage error, things like that. kind of maybe more fundamental practical maths that is worth an awful lot of marks at ordinary level, but doesn't feature that highly at higher level. So you need to revise those, and the exam papers are perfect for that.
If there was one topic that's the key to unlocking the language of maths, what is that topic?
Well, it is algebra, right? Maybe people might say, "Oh God, I wish it wasn't algebra," but it is algebra, right? And the reason is because algebra is in every topic at Leaving Cert higher level, particularly, but it's in every topic that comes up, even at junior cert or ordinary level. It kind of creeps in there a bit. However, some people will say, "Oh God, algebra is the thing that really catches me out." If I do think it takes a bit of time for people to kind of maybe be ready for it, and it can depend on school and all sorts of factors, your teacher and all sorts of factors, how well you learn that first time around. However, you can revise it again as you get older, and it can click in, and then all of a sudden some of these other parts don't seem as difficult. Now, if I just was to say one other thing with that, right? There are other topics in maths. For example, statistics and probability being perfect examples. They're a big part of paper 2 in the Leaving Cert. And they're worth an awful lot of marks. They can be worth like up to 40% between the two of them in paper 2 of the Leaving Cert higher and ordinary level. And they're really, really different from algebra. And people can be really good at them, but they're often taught late in the course. So sometimes students don't realize they're going to be good at that until they get to it. And all of a sudden, it can be a real boost for students. And similarly with the problem solving, some students who struggle with some of the algebra stuff, some calculus, they struggle with that. They're just really good at reading the questions and figuring out what's wanted. And that can be a boost to them as well. So, there's different aspects, but algebra is number one.
And obviously, paper one, paper two, you have lots of different topics. You've got your algebra functions, you got your financial math sets, and lots of different topics. When a student looks at their textbook or they look at the past papers, and I always say, start off by looking at the papers, look at the different topics, and kind of reverse engineer out of that. But different topics have different levels of priority, don't they? How does a student figure out, is that through the marking schemes or any advice on how a student should, focus their time and prioritize the different topics?
Yeah, so it's a really broad question, but I could actually, it's actually one I could talk about for the whole 30 minutes, but I won't, right? But what I would say is, look, that's where the exam papers come into play, because the exam papers show us what are coming up every year, and they show us what's worth the most marks. So after, as you get closer to your third year exam, your sixth year exams, it is the exam papers you practice for that very reason, because you could go down a rabbit hole of spending loads of time on a section that just very rarely comes up. In Leaving Cert, financial maths has been a case like that over the past number of years. It did come up last year, but it didn't come up at all in the exam for a number of years. And some students would have spent an awful lot of time at it. So it is the exam papers that indicate what's most important. And I said that algebra is the key to the language of maths, because it is, because it just is, it's every single day of the week. It's like grammar in Spanish or whatever. But inside in the Leaving Cert higher level and Leaving Cert ordinary level, functions and calculus are worth the most marks if you look at it, right? So that's your differentiation, your integration, your functions questions. But of course, algebra is what you need to solve any of those questions. So,
And I think, and I think for a lot of the younger students, second and third year students, there's a big message here: get good at algebra, specifically in the younger years, so that when you do go into fifth and sixth, you have those basics put in place.
yeah, and I'm going to tell you a story here about a student from a number of years back, right? It's coming on 10 years back now when I met this student first. It seems amazing. But she came to me and she was doing grinds with me after school. So she was in a little class and we were working away, and she'd started sixth year. I'm thinking back to it now, right? And anyway, she was smart, right? But she, it just wasn't going great for her. And at a certain stage, she came up to me and said, "Look, I just don't get it. I'm good at every other subject. I'm just not good at maths." She said, "I got all A's in my junior cert. I got a C in maths back when it was C's, A's, B's, and C's." And anyway, we talked through it. And what was it? When we talked through it, she had missed a couple of weeks in school. Actually, my
Wow.
kids have tonsillitis here. That's what she had. She actually had to get her tonsils removed, is what it was. So she was sick for a while, then she went into hospital, then she was recovering, then she came back.
Wow.
But she missed the time where they were learning the basics of algebra. Then after that, there was an exam and they moved classes, and all of a sudden and the word she used was cloudy. It all got cloudy. Now, if I think of you guys here, I'm sure a lot of you are sixth years. You were in, what were you? In second year, so when COVID struck,
Hmm.
exactly the same as that girl, right? Some of you are fifth year. You were in first year at the time. So in your second year of learning, that was completely broken up. So what I say to all my students that I meet along the way these days is that everyone, sixth year, fifth year, fourth year, they all have these gaps in their knowledge, but it's different for every person. And for their teacher, it's practically impossible to pin it down because the teacher might say, "Did you learn statistics?" And the student is like, "Yeah, yeah, I learned statistic." But it could have been on Zoom. You know what I mean? It could have been any of these scenarios. So it's very hard. What that student did, because she was very determined, I gave her a book, a little kind of workbook of questions, which were first and second year questions, and she worked her way through the whole thing. She definitely got much better at it. She never loved it, but she got much better at it. She did absolutely fine. She went on to study medicine. So,
Wow.
I know straight away she would still say maths isn't her favorite subject, but she got through it. You know what I mean? She got through it, and she found her way.
And that was one of the big things last year, wasn't it? In the Leaving Cert, was a paper one was really, really challenging, and a lot of students came out shell shocked after that. Any advice to students who have a bad day or a bad paper or a bad question, how they should respond to that? And I know you gave your students great advice for paper two.
Yeah. So students who know me know that my number one catchphrase is, "If you don't know what to do, do what you know." So in the exam itself, in that paper one, which was really hard, you talk about the language of maths, you know, that was a different language for a lot of students in there, It's just they really struggled with it and they did, and I understand why. However, the students, my own guides, they'd say that phrase just kept going around in my head. If you don't know what to do, do what you know. Get something down. The first line leads to the second line to the third line. However, they came out bamboozled, tired, going, "What was that?" Right? I have this course called the 21-day challenge, which is 21 days to the leaving cert. We revise everything on the run up to it. So what I told them that night was, I said, "Okay, get your parents onto the line as well, so they can listen to what I'm going to say." And I just talked about the bell curve and how basically there's going to be the same amount of H1s this year as there was last year, as there was the year before, and so on and so forth. They're just not going to have all these students failing because they just can't. They can't allow it. And so what we did over the weekend is kind of like what you'd say, Ray. We got the mindset right. They went into paper two ready. They were kind of forgetting about paper one. We had done a lot of just practical, focused work on topics over the weekend, and thankfully, paper two was better than paper one. It was a lot like what we had predicted it would be, and they sailed through, and we're delighted. But not everybody jumped that hurdle because not everybody went into paper two on Monday morning. That's the reality. Some people threw the towel in.
And that is the thing, not to throw the towel in. And I always say to students, stay in the exam, put something down. As you said, if you don't know what to do, do what you know. Great question has come in. And by the way, guys, if you do have questions, type in. Absolutely, all questions are welcome. Great question from Aoife. And she's asking, is there a difference between paper one and two in maths? And what is the difference in emphasis on paper one and paper two? Leaving cert student.
Yeah. And feel free if you want to ask any further detail on this, right? But I'll answer it. It's a great question. And I've often said that a lot of students are going well, look online for H1, H2, H3 after paper one, and don't get it then after paper two. Boy, what's the difference? Well, paper one in both papers is 300 marks on both papers, 600 marks in total. Okay. So they're both equally important in terms of the amount of marks, right? However, paper one is algebra, it's functions and calculus, and then it's what they call number, which is sequences and series, financial maths, complex numbers. Now, if you look at all those, really it's just algebra and applied algebra, right? So it's just really algebra and lots of other kind of variations of algebra. A lot of students who work hard can get very good at paper one, okay? And there could be students like real diligent students who do well at that. And I would say a lot of them would come out after paper one generally, not last year, but generally, and feel that they're doing quite well. But paper two is very different. Paper two is geometry, and then on one side, right, with geometry, and I'll break that down to geometry, trigonometry, coordinate geometry. Okay, so those three on one side. That's your visual stuff, your 3D diagrams, your constructions, your theorems, all those kind of things. And then on the other side, you got statistics and probability. And I would tell you, there are very few students out there who would be really good at both the visual stuff of the geometry, trigonometry, and also the stats and probability. A lot of people are good at one, but not both. And I think myself that sometimes students, teachers, schools place too much emphasis on paper one because you kind of have to do you have to practice all that stuff first. But they run out of time for paper two, and paper two is worth just the same amount of marks. So it is a little nugget I would take for some people that on balance you should spend the same amount of time on both. And if I was a betting man, I'd say you've spent much more time on paper one than paper two up to now.
And the big interesting thing is you just said paper two is all the visual stuff. And can anyone type in for me which side of the brain is the visual part of your brain where you can see the different images, the pictures, the shapes? Can anyone type? Right. Thank you, Charlotte. Straight in. So we're using our right brain. It's more right brain focus. Galia's in there as well. Awesome. Thank you for that. So we're 10 years into Project Maths now at this stage, Eoghan. And we know maths now is quite languagey. So, Paul, is that the same for ordinary level maths? That was the question. Yeah, great question, Paul. That's Lorraine, by the way. So thanks, Lorraine, for that question. Maths is quite languagey now. So that was the big shift in Project Maths when it came in 10 years ago. Some of our students have dyslexia or dyscalculia, so they struggle with different learning challenges. Any advice for students who would struggle, say, with the reading side, and that in turn is difficult for the comprehension side of things?
100%, and it's absolutely true. It just is. It's a different exam, and it has those difficulties that you're describing. I would say, firstly, I've met students with dyscalculia that how it would present to me is that real fear of maths, where their mind kind of goes blank. So I've definitely met those students, and a lot of students who try to read the amount of text and then comprehend it and then answer the questions, find it difficult. So definitely. Now, number one, if you can get any resources for yourself in terms of scribes, in terms of extra time in the exam, absolutely take those resources. It's just definitely in your interest. And if you're, if you qualified to get them, it's just leveling the playing field. That's all it is, so absolutely take that, because for myself, I would actually perform better if someone was reading the questions to me, rather than reading it myself. It's interesting. I always say I would actually process the information best if I was looking out the window and someone was reading it to me. So that's how my mind works. I'm not sure what does that say, but that's it. Then once you're inside there, of course, the exam is the exam. So I always remember back when Project Maths came in first, right? It's hard to believe this, but before that, there was just never a reason for anyone to highlight anything inside the maths paper because it was just all there right in front of you. Solve this, find X, whatever it be, right? It'd be, there was no reason. I always remember back in 2013, a student, his name was Owen as well, and an exam we were doing inside in school, he was highlighting. And I can remember, I can picture the lads looking at him highlighting, and I was looking at him highlighting. And afterwards, I said to him, I said, Owen, come here, why were you highlighting there on the page? And he said, I was highlighting the key bits of information because I find it difficult to process it, the big block of text. And he said, what I do is I highlight the key bits of information as I'm going through. That helps, number one. Then I look at it again just to highlight a bit. That's number two. And then when I read the questions, I just look back and the highlighted bit of information is usually where the answer lies. And what I noticed that year is that all the other students, one by one, started doing it. And it makes total sense. But it didn't make any sense to me first day because it was so foreign an idea compared to the old course. So that is one simple thing that can be done. Highlight the key bits of information inside there.
And that's actually, we have a formula SWOTS for our 30-minute study sprint. And the S is skim and scan, the W's take out the key words. And that's the key words or concepts, to underline those or highlight those. So that's a great tip for those. We're big into mantras here within the Raise the Game, the Elevate program. And what I always find, you said it there, there's a fear of maths. And students, that little voice gets into your head, oh, I'm no good at maths. That's the voice of frustration, fear coming up. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to fail. I'm not going to do well. To counteract that voice and that fear and that kind of negative mindset, is there any little mantra or a phrase or something that you would say to a student that could almost become like a little mantra to coach and help them over the next couple of months when it comes to maths?
Well, I will say that so many students come back to me and say that same thing. So it must be true. They say, inside in the exam, I kept saying, if I don't know what to do, I'll do what I know. And what they say about that is what that means at every level, line one of question one, all the way through to kind of a general idea, just the overall philosophy. And what it means is then you're never going, if you accept that and you say, that's what I'm going to do. If I don't know what to do, I'll do what I know. You're always going to write down something. And what the thing about maths is, you see, the first line will lead you to the second line. I think Ray's up there in Dublin. If I went out the door here and drove up to Dublin, I don't need to know the whole journey up there. I just need to know how to start, how to get to in my case, how to get to Cork City. Where will I go from Cork City? And that's the same thing. It's step by step. I will say, I see it all the time. Students who just do find it difficult. And I could say this could be for the student, again, like that girl I mentioned earlier, who said, I'm really good at everything else, but I'm not good at maths. Or it can be someone who'd say, their parents might say, oh, sure, I was never good at maths. Your father was never good at maths. You're not going to be good at maths. They can have that mindset. But if you can change it around a little bit and are willing to try every question, and all of a sudden you start getting stuff right, I'm telling you that mindset can change fast.
Yeah, and this is what I'm talking about, it's my mindset. And maths, it is a learnable skill. It's something that you learn, and I think you said the magic word, which is practice as well. We're going to wrap things up quick enough soon, Owen, and I appreciate your time here this evening. If anyone does have any questions, type them in. Now is the time. All questions are welcome right here this evening. If a student gets a bad result, either at Christmas right now or into the mocks, and they're just feeling deflated, or they're feeling, I don't know how to pick myself up from this, or they are getting ready now for the mocks and they want to give themselves a jump up, what would you say would be a good place and a good way of, getting ready now for the mock exams?
Yeah. But the number one thing in general is the word you said, it is practice. So one way or another, you must put in the time, if you want to improve. There's just no other way around it. Whichever way works for you is great. Now, sometimes students can discipline themselves to do it and can use the textbook. But if you do need some sort of outside help and motivation and things like that, there's one free site that I would certainly recommend. It's called themathstutor.ie, and I think we could put that into the chat. And when I say it's free, there's a free trial there. And I know that over Christmas, it'll be free for a couple of weeks for students during the Christmas break. And that can help you just, this to, I suppose you can see all the recordings of all the past questions, things like that. And that can be really of benefit to students. After that, like, if you can just kind of get the idea. Well, I'll give you one bit. It mightn't be you mightn't be too delighted to hear right now, but it's only once you go back after school, it's only 3-4 weeks till your mocks. And what happens at that time is naturally the teachers load on the extra work because they have to be able to say, oh yeah, we covered this by the time you did the exam. And so it's very hard to revise the old stuff when you're still learning the new stuff. So during the Christmas holidays, that's your time to try and do that bit of extra practice.
That's brilliant. And the Maths Tutor is part of the Tuition Centre, and that's part of Owen's company. So again, there's a free access to that. We're going to put the link. I'm going to send out the link to the students. Also, you have a free worksheet for students as well, Owen. Do you want to call that up, or can you show that? And yeah, we're going to give everybody this free worksheet. This is for exam students, isn't it?
Yeah, this is for exam students, typically for your Leaving Cert students. But this is something that I found is nowhere else to be found. You all have your table book, of course, right? But there's formulae that are not in the table book. So when Ray and I did the Leaving Cert, there was fewer formula. We had to remember all the formula off by heart, right? But for you guys, obviously, you have the table book, so there's a load of stuff in there, for area and volume and so on. However, there are some that are just not in there. And I've so many times inside in the pre-exam, I've seen people leafing through the table book looking for formula, and they're not there. So here on one sheet are all of the formula which are not in the table book. Okay. So it is everything for paper one, your algebra, sequence series, integration. This is actually an integration, the average value formula. For some reason, the average value function, uh, for some reason, that's one that students always think is in the table book, but it's not there. So your complex numbers, differentiation, integration, and then these guys down here, the trigonometric periodic functions, probability, and stats. So if you print that out and put it on your wall and look at that all the time, you see that every time you're studying, those formulae will sink in, and you won't be one of those students sinking inside in the pre's looking for the exam, looking for those. So Ray, I'll send this on to you, and you can feel free to share it with everybody.
I'll share that, and as you said, also on the mathstutor.ie, there's a free trial as well. And for any students, that's an excellent resource. There's access to that. Is it over the next week or so, Owen? And
let me show you this guy here. This is the mathstutor.ie. You can click up here for the free trial. So the free trial gives you access to a lot of the site, algebra, things like that, statistics, but then during Christmas, what they say is the paywall comes down, and so you'd have access to the whole site for free, and then people can see is it something they like. Just to show how it works, there's basically two things. You can use it to revise any topic you want. So I know I'm conscious I talked a lot about Leaving Cert here, but say if there's some junior cycle students here, and say if you're struggling in a topic. So let me see here. So I'm clicking down JCH, so junior cert higher level. So if you are struggling with anything in algebra, you can go back here, and students have used this to teach themselves all of algebra. So you're struggling in indices or something like that, you missed it for some reason, you've got questions, marking schemes, videos, you've got notes in there, there's quizzes, there's for people to self-test. And so that is one thing. So basically you can teach yourself any aspect of the course. And then if I go back and if I click on Leaving Cert ordinary level here, again, you can do the same thing. Those are the full topics. But if you click on exam prep, it'll give you all of the past questions. And for example, if we think back to last year, am I after going past it? Leaving Cert Prep for Leaving Cert Higher Level. If I click on the past exam questions, like if you want to look back at last year's paper one and see why it was so difficult, you click on that and you see the exam paper and you see all for each one. So here we are, question 3, which was one that students didn't like. You have the question, the marking scheme, and the video, and it's all there for the last 10 years, all the way back to 2010, the pre-exams actually for this. So there's a load of stuff in there.
And what I find with any subject, but particularly with and one of the things we talk about our students here, the T in our SWAT's formula is test, and it's around self-testing. So the tests, this is about creating little tests you can test yourself. But what I love about videos is, no matter if they get the video there or through YouTube or whatever, I always find watching a little video or a demonstration gets you in the mood for the thing, and that's where. That's a big part of it as well, isn't it? So watching a demonstration, and that way then you can actually copy and it kind of it gives you a starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talk about mindset, and it just kind of gets you into the mindset, gets you into the flow of it, and it's a kind of, I suppose, a low pressure way of revising as well. You have someone else doing a little bit of the work for you, they're showing it to you. So it's a little bit easier than you trying to read it all yourself. But you can pause it, you can go backwards, you can look at it again, So again, like, Leaving Cert Higher Level, you were talking about the quizzes and stuff. You can test yourself and you can get the feedback to see, did you get it right or wrong? But, it's not the same as the teacher looking over your shoulder or an exam or something like that. So it's kind of low pressure, but up to the student themselves, but very beneficial.
And just any parting words then? Obviously, we've a big cohort, and well done for everybody for turning out tonight. Owen, if there was one thing, and obviously we're coming into the holidays this week, and a lot of students now will be taking some well-earned downtime, but then we have a lot of exam students as well. For any student who does want to do a little bit of work over the next week or two, any little piece of advice to get themselves ready for next year?
Yeah, well, look, it's definitely, the key word is practice. That is the key word. And as you're getting closer to your mocks, particularly, I imagine, if a second or fifth year student was willing to do a bit of extra work, maybe you fifth years are. I have a good class of fifth years myself. But if they were, back to the textbook for those guys, right, or an extra resource. But for your third years and your sixth years, you're really heading into exam papers now. I will give one bit of advice, which is somewhat controversial, but I think this is great. I think this has worked, and I have the proof of the pudding. Okay. A lot of people struggle with the problem solving questions. Okay. So particularly paper 2, again, your trigonometric stuff, geometry, probability. If you are one of those higher level students who struggles with the problem solving, if you went back and looked at the ordinary level problem solving questions, I'm going to tell you, they're not that easy, and they're great practice, because oftentimes the higher level ones, a lot of the parts are exactly the same standard as the ordinary. And then there's just a bit of extra difficult ones at the end. And I tell you, they're a great place to practice. And it's something I do for my fifth years. I've just put in the order. They don't know they're going to get it. They don't know that's going to be their Christmas present, but they're going to get a booklet of Leaving Cert ordinary level papers. And we will practice every question inside there before they get to their mocks next year.
And one of the things that I always say with maths, problems equals points. The more problems you attack, the more points you're going to get on the paper, and the more points you're getting the Leaving Cert. Is that a good phrase, or is that a good little bit of advice?
Absolutely. The only students really who were disappointed with their results last year in Leaving Cert Maths, for the main point, unfortunately, they are the ones who just threw in the towel. I wouldn't even blame them, because it was so hard, the first paper, but they just couldn't get themselves to rise back up for paper 2. The people who just kind of got stuck back into it, when they got the results at the end, they were like, oh, look, I did fine. Do you know what I mean? And, so that's it. if you're willing to attack the problems, willing to get stuck in, you will be rewarded for it.
And the one thing is, if you found the paper hard, chances are everyone else found the paper hard. So if you stayed in there, attacked each question, gave it a go, then the chances are you're going to be graded anyway. Isn't that the thing? It's always to stay in the exam.
Always to stay in the exam. I say the exact same thing as you. I say, don't come out of the exam. I say that to my online students, stay in. For my students down here in Hampton, I say, I'm going to be standing outside an exam hall and I do not want to see you until the exam is over.
And that phrase you said, if I don't know, what is it again?
If you don't know what to do, do what you know. If
Brilliant.
you don't know what to do, do what you know. It's simple.
And Aoife's on fire here this evening. Is that sheet for both higher or an ordinary level?
It is. It is. So it's higher and ordinary level. So it is absolutely. Some of the ones, just feature at higher level more so, but it is for both.
And I teach a technique called whiz grids, which are one-page summaries. So for each chapter, really, you could create a one-page summary of the theory of each topic, couldn't you?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And the main parts and all that would certainly work, yeah.
Brilliant, Eoghan. Listen, thank you for your time. You've gone over and above this evening. Thank you for everyone for turning out. What we're going to do is I'm going to send out the link. I'm going to send out that summary sheet, and we'll send out a link to the Maths Tutor. That's a brilliant resource, and there's a free trial up there for anybody who wants to go in and have a look over the next 2 weeks. Eoghan, thank you for your time this evening. As always, an absolute inspiration. Loads of brilliant tips there this evening, and we do appreciate your time, and hopefully that's going to give students, I see lots of thank yous coming in, that's going to give students a boost and to help them to become better at maths. So thank you, Eoghan.
And you're all very welcome. And thanks, guys. Thank you for that. I see the comments coming through there. And Ray, thanks again. I hope to see you down in Cork one of these days.
Absolutely. On that note, everybody, happy Christmas. And we'll see you on the other side of the new year. And thank you for everyone for turning out tonight. Good night. God bless. Slán. Thanks, Eoghan. Take care. Good night.